The rain tapped against the windshield of Donald Vance's pickup truck, a persistent, rhythmic reminder that he was sitting in his own driveway, yet unable to turn the key and step inside. His hands, worn and calloused from a lifetime of hard work, gripped the steering wheel. He was 51 years old, a senior systems administrator at Apex Logistics, and for the past 10 years, he had been the invisible pillar holding the company together. But today the silence in his truck was filled with the echoing voice of Brenda Kelly, the director of operations. During his annual performance review, she had barely looked up from her smartphone, her voice cool and dismissive. "Donald, you are incredibly reliable," she had said, her fingers tapping away at a message. "But you are just not leadership material. We need someone with a dynamic presence to lead the new systems division. We are going to bring in an outside candidate, but we expect you to train them and keep doing what you do best." Donald had not argued. He had not flinched. He had spent the last 10 years saving Brenda from her own operational disasters, working 80 hours a week, and keeping the proprietary database running through sheer willpower. He had simply nodded, stood up, and said, "I understand." Now, sitting in his driveway, Donald realized that his loyalty had been treated as weakness. He looked at his dashboard clock, which read exactly 5 minutes past 5 in the afternoon. For 10 years, he had never left the office before 7, sometimes 8. But today, he had walked out at exactly 5 o'clock. When he walked through the front door, his 14-year-old son, Toby, was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by cardboard, wires, and glue. Toby looked up in surprise. "Dad? You are home early." The question stung. Donald realized how rare it was for him to be home for dinner. How many of Toby's soccer games and school plays he had missed, to patch up server errors or rerun logistics reports. He forced a warm smile and walked over to the table. "Yes, Toby. I am home. What are we building?" "It is my science project," Toby said, holding up a small plastic gear mechanism. "It is about how complex systems fail when a single vital component stops performing its extra duties. If this small gear only turns when it is supposed to, instead of constantly spinning to compensate for the loose belt, the whole machine slows down and stops. But it saves the gear from wearing out." Donald stared at the plastic mechanism. The kid was describing his own life. Donald had spent 10 years being the gear that spun twice as fast to cover up everyone else's laziness. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his company-issued smartphone, and stared at the screen. A dozen emails were already queuing up. He pressed the power button, held it down, and watched the screen go dark. He placed the phone on the high shelf in the hallway, next to his keys. That night, Donald cooked a real dinner. He and Toby made homemade burgers, talking about school, football, and Toby's plans for high school. For the first time in years, Donald's mind was not drifting back to the server room. He was entirely present. The next morning, Donald woke up at 7. He did not check his email. He made breakfast for Toby, walked him to the bus stop, and drove to work. He arrived at the Apex Logistics parking lot at 5 minutes to 9. He sat in his truck until his watch showed exactly 9 o'clock, then walked through the front doors. No early preparation, no checking the night run reports over coffee, no preempting the morning crisis. He walked straight to his cubicle, sat down, and opened his inbox. There were 47 unread emails. Many were marked urgent, forwarded to him by junior managers who did not want to solve their own problems. Donald selected all 47 and marked them as read. He did not delete them. He simply decided that if his name was not in the to field, it was not his problem. He was going to work his contract. 40 hours a week. Not a minute more. At 9 o'clock and 30 minutes, Roger Lawson, the lead sales representative, came rushing over to Donald's desk, his face flushed red. "Donald, thank goodness you are here. The shipment database for our primary regional clients is glitched. The delivery dates are showing up as blank. Brenda told me to ask you to rewrite the script and fix it." Donald looked up, his expression calm. "Is there a formal ticket submitted to the systems queue?" Roger blinked. "Well, no. You know how it is. It takes 3 days for tickets to get approved. Can you just write a quick patch like you always do?" Donald shook his head. "No, Roger. Without an approved ticket, I cannot modify the database. That is the official policy. You will need to submit a ticket, and it will be processed in the order it was received. But Brenda said you would just do it." Roger protested. Then Brenda can submit the ticket, Donald replied, returning his attention to his monitor. Roger stood there, mouth open, before storming off. Donald felt a strange, quiet peace settle over him. He was not being difficult. He was simply following the company's own rules. He spent the rest of the morning working on his assigned compliance reports. When 12 o'clock arrived, he took a full 1-hour lunch break away from his desk. Something he had not done in a decade. When he returned, Brenda was waiting by his cubicle. She looked tense, her arms crossed. Donald, Roger said you refused to help him with the shipment database. We have clients waiting. I did not refuse, Brenda, Donald said, his voice even. I instructed him to follow standard operating protocol by submitting a systems ticket. As a senior systems administrator, I must adhere to our security compliance guidelines to maintain database integrity. Brenda narrowed her eyes. Donald, we are a fast-paced environment. We do not have time for unnecessary red tape. You need to be more flexible. Flexibility is what led to our last 3 database corruptions, Donald said. I am keeping our system secure by following the rules. Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but the sheer, professional calm in Donald's demeanor left her with nothing to say. She let out a sharp breath and walked away. Donald smiled, sat down, and continued his work. At exactly 5 o'clock, he shut down his computer, grabbed his coat, and walked out. The machine was starting to wobble, and Donald was finally letting it. By Tuesday morning, the minor cracks in the operations of Apex Logistics had widened into visible fissures. The proprietary shipment tracking database, which Donald had spent years quietly patching and maintaining on his own time, began to lag severely. An automated script he had written to sync regional client orders was suspended because the server required a manual memory flush. A routine task Donald used to perform at 6 o'clock every morning before anyone else logged in. Now, because he arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, the system was bottlenecked. The Darwell account, the company's largest and most demanding client, was in a complete uproar. Their logistics managers could not access their real-time portal, and the sales team was blind. At 10 o'clock, Brenda stormed into Donald's workspace, holding a lukewarm mug of coffee. Her eyes were wide with stress. Donald, the Darwell portal is completely down. The client is threatening to terminate their contract. Why hasn't the server flush been executed? Donald leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. Brenda, the server maintenance script requires senior operational oversight. My current job description limits my duties to standard maintenance and database audits during my core hours of 9 to 5. Overnight and early morning systems optimization are outside my scope of work. Are you serious? Brenda hissed, leaning over his desk. We are talking about our biggest account. You have always done the morning flushes. I did them as a courtesy because I believed my dedication was recognized, Donald replied, keeping his voice steady and low. But as you made clear yesterday, I am not leadership material. Therefore, I am focusing my energy on performing my documented duties to the letter. If you require additional systems support outside of core hours, you will need to authorize overtime pay or hire a dedicated night administrator. Brenda's jaw tightened. She looked as though she wanted to scream, but the corporate environment forced her to restrain herself. Fine. I will have the systems team handle it. The systems team, Donald knew, consisted of junior analysts who did not even know where the main servers were housed. He watched her walk away, knowing the real trouble was just beginning. During his lunch break, Donald walked down to the basement archives to visit Gerald Higgins. Gerald was 68 years old, a brilliant database architect who had mentored Donald when he first joined Apex Logistics. Gerald was sitting at his cluttered desk, staring blankly at a document on his screen. His eyes were red and his hands were trembling. Donald shut the door behind him. Gerald? What is going on? Gerald looked up, letting out a ragged sigh. It is Brenda, Donald. She called me into her office this morning. She told me that due to a restructuring program for the upcoming corporate merger, my position is being eliminated. They are laying me off, effective at the end of the week. Donald frowned. Laid off? You have been here for 22 years. You designed the original network architecture. I know, Gerald said, his voice cracking. But they are using the restructuring to avoid paying out my full retirement package and vested stock options. They are offering me a tiny severance package, but only if I sign a waiver releasing the company from all future liabilities. If I do not sign, they will fire me for performance issues, which they are fabricating. Donald's blood ran cold. He pulled up a chair and sat next to his old friend. This is financial elder abuse, Gerald. They are targeting you because of your age and your pension. He leaned closer to the screen, reviewing the documents Gerald had received. As Donald read through the corporate restructuring plan that Brenda had drafted, his eyes caught a section outlining the planned termination of 42 systems employees across their California offices, all scheduled for the end of the week. Gerald, Donald said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Did they send out any official notices about these layoffs? No, Gerald replied. Brenda said they wanted to keep it quiet to prevent panic before the merger signing on Friday. Donald shook his head. Under the Federal Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, also known as the Wasnt Act, under Title 29 of the United States Code, Section 2101, any employer with over 100 workers must provide at least 60 days written notice before a mass layoff. 42 workers in this division alone, combined with the administrative layoffs, easily crosses the threshold. By keeping this quiet to protect the merger, they are committing a major federal violation. Gerald stared at him. Really, yes, Donald said, and what they are doing to you violates the California Welfare and Institutions Code Section 15,610.30, which protects elders from financial abuse, including the wrongful taking or withholding of property or vested benefits with the intent to defraud. They are trying to bully you into signing away your rights. Donald looked at his mentor, his jaw set. Do not sign anything, Gerald. We are going to document everything. Every email, every performance review, every memo. Brenda thinks she can sweep us under the rug to make her numbers look good for the merger. But she just handed us the keys to shut her down. Gerald wiped his eyes, a small spark of hope returning to his face. Thank you, Donald, but what about your job? If Brenda finds out you are helping me, she will fire you too. Donald smiled, a cold, hard expression. Let her try. I have spent 10 years keeping this company running. If she wants to play dirty, she is going to find out how hard it is to operate in the dark. Donald returned to his desk, his mind focused. He opened his personal laptop, which was connected to his private network, and began drafting a detailed log of every conversation he had with Gerald, alongside the corporate memos Brenda had distributed. He was no longer just a systems administrator. He was building a legal shield to protect his friend and a hammer to drop on Brenda Kelly. By Wednesday afternoon, the operational gears of Apex Logistics were grinding to a halt. Brenda, realizing that Donald was serious about working only his core hours, made a desperate attempt to bypass him. She accessed the company's shared network drive, seeking to copy the proprietary data synchronization scripts Donald had written. Her plan was to hand the code to a junior technician and force them to run the server optimization routines. However, she ran into a digital wall. The system architecture was not owned by the company. Donald had developed the core database synchronization code and custom security protocols at home, on his own personal computer, using his own software licenses, before he ever signed a contract with Apex Logistics. When he was hired, he had granted the company a limited, non-exclusive license to use the system, but he had never signed an intellectual property assignment agreement. Legally, the exclusive rights to reproduce, modify, and distribute the software remained solely with Donald under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106, which governs copyright protection. When Brenda's attempts to copy the source code failed due to encryption keys registered to Donald's personal developer account, she panicked. The pre-merger audit was scheduled for Thursday morning, and if the system's compliance logs were not signed off by a senior administrator, the merger would fall through, driven by desperation. Brenda accessed the corporate compliance portal using her administrative credentials. She opened the pending weekly systems safety and audit reports and forged Donald's electronic signature and initials on 3 separate compliance certificates, verifying that the servers had been manually audited and cleared for operation. Donald, who had set up automated security alerts on his personal developer console, received a notification that his digital signature credentials had been applied to documents he had never opened. He immediately ran a system audit and tracked the transaction back to Brenda's personal office computer and IP address. He quietly downloaded the system logs, the database access history, and the digital signature metadata. This was a clear criminal offense under California Penal Code Section 470, which defines forgery as the unauthorized signing of another person's name with the intent to defraud. By forging his signature on federal compliance logs, Brenda had crossed a line from corporate politics into criminal liability. Donald spent the next 2 hours compiling the evidence into a secure, encrypted drive. He didn't just have evidence of forgery. He also uncovered files indicating Brenda had been diverting client logistics data to a private transportation consultancy owned by her brother. A flagrant breach of fiduciary duty to Apex Logistics. At exactly 5 o'clock, Donald stood up, shut down his terminal, and walked out of the building. That evening, he sat with Toby at the dining room table, helping him wire the motor to the base of his science project. Toby looked up at him, studying his face. "You look happy, Dad." "I am, Toby," Donald said, smiling as he tightened a small plastic bracket. "I am just watching a system correct itself." "How?" Toby asked. "Sometimes," Donald explained, "a system gets so out of balance that the people running it think they can ignore the rules. But the rules are there for a reason. If you try to bypass them, the system eventually breaks itself. All you have to do is step back and let the laws of physics, or the laws of the land, do their work." Toby nodded, satisfied, and went back to his wiring. Donald's phone, sitting on the hallway table, began to vibrate. He walked over, glanced at the screen, and saw Brenda's name flashing. He did not answer. He let it ring. A minute later, it vibrated again. This time it was Howard Davis, the executive vice president of Apex Logistics. Donald let it go to voicemail. He went back to the kitchen, poured a cup of tea, and spent the rest of the evening listening to his son talk about his science teacher. When Donald woke up on Thursday morning, he turned on his phone and checked his voicemail. There were 16 missed calls from Brenda and 3 from Howard Davis. Howard's final message was brief and tense. "Donald, we need you in boardroom C at 9 o'clock this morning. It is urgent." Donald arrived at the office at exactly 9 o'clock. He did not go to his desk. He walked straight to boardroom C, holding a leather folder containing the encrypted drive and printed copies of the legal statutes. As he opened the door, he saw Howard Davis sitting at the head of the table, his tie loosened and his face drawn. Brenda was standing near the whiteboard, her face pale and her fingers tapping nervously against her arm. Howard looked up, his expression a mixture of relief and frustration. "Donald, thank goodness you are here. Sit down. We have a massive crisis and we need you to fix it immediately." Donald pulled out a chair, sat down, and placed his leather folder on the table. "Good morning, Howard. What seems to be the problem?" Howard leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. "Donald, the Darwell database is locked, and we have a pre-merger compliance audit happening in exactly 2 hours. We need you to run the manual memory flushes and sign off on the safety logs. Brenda says you are refusing to do it, and she is threatening to have you terminated for insubordination." Donald looked at Brenda, whose eyes were fixed on the floor. He smiled slightly, then opened the leather folder. "I have not refused to perform my duties." "Howard," Donald said calmly, "however, I cannot and will not sign off on the compliance logs." "Why not?" Howard asked, his voice rising in frustration. "Because," Donald said, sliding a printed document across the table, "someone has already signed my name to them. These are 3 safety compliance logs that were uploaded to the portal yesterday afternoon. They bear my electronic signature and initials, certifying that the servers were audited. But as you can see from the network logs I have attached, I was at home when these files were uploaded. The transaction originated from Brenda's user account and her office computer terminal." Howard looked at the document, his eyes widening. He looked up at Brenda. "Brenda, what is this?" "It was a system glitch," Brenda stammered, her face turning crimson. "I was just trying to expedite the workflow because Donald was refusing to cooperate." "This is not a glitch, Brenda," Donald said, his voice flat. "Under California Penal Code Section 470, Forging an electronic signature on compliance reports to defraud auditors is a criminal offense. This is forgery, and it carries significant legal consequences. Howard rubbed his temples, a look of sheer panic crossing his face. Donald, we can handle this internally. We don't need to involve lawyers. Just run the scripts and we will sort this out. There is a second issue, Donald continued, sliding another document forward. The data synchronization script you want me to run is my personal intellectual property. I developed it at home, on my own time and equipment, before I was hired. I granted Apex Logistics a limited license to run it, but under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106, I hold the exclusive copyright. Any attempt by the company to copy, modify, or assign this code to a third party during the merger without my express written consent constitutes copyright infringement. The merger entity cannot legally absorb these systems without my signature. Brenda stood frozen. Howard looked at the paper, then at Donald. What do you want, Donald? I am not finished, Donald said. I have also documented the company's proposed restructuring plan, which Brenda drafted. It outlines the immediate termination of 42 systems employees, including my mentor, Gerald Higgins, who is 68. This mass layoff, executed without the mandatory 60 days written notice, is a direct violation of the Federal Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act under Title 29 of the United States Codes, Section 2101. The civil penalties and class action lawsuits resulting from this would immediately halt your merger. Furthermore, the targeted termination of Gerald Higgins to deny him his vested pension constitutes financial elder abuse under California Welfare and Institutions. Code Section 15610.30. Donald paused, letting the weight of the legal violations sink into the room. Finally, Donald said, sliding the last document across the table, I have evidence that Brenda has been diverting proprietary client lead data from our servers to a logistics consultancy registered to her brother. This is a clear breach of her fiduciary duty to this corporation. Howard stared at the documents, his face completely devoid of color. He slowly turned his head to look at Brenda, who looked as if she were about to collapse. Brenda, Howard said, his voice dangerously low, leave the room now. But Howard, Brenda started. Get out! Howard barked. Brenda grabbed her papers and scurried out of the boardroom, closing the door behind herself. Howard leaned back, staring at Donald. He took a deep breath. Donald, this is a disaster. If this gets out, the merger is dead, and the board will have my head. What is it going to take to resolve this? Donald leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. I have a formal job offer from Hire Consulting, Howard. They are offering me a senior position with a significant salary increase. I am fully prepared to sign it and walk out of this building today. If I do, I will withdraw the license for my proprietary code, and I will assist Gerald Higgins and the other 41 employees in filing class action lawsuits for the Wasnt Act violations and financial elder abuse. Howard swallowed hard. And if you stay? Donald said, these are my conditions. First, I am promoted to Director of Systems, reporting directly to you with a salary of $200,000 a year, which is double my current rate. Second, I get full operational and hiring control over the systems division. No corporate interference. Third, the restructuring plan is canceled. Gerald Higgins is reinstated immediately with a 10% raise, and his vested pension is fully secured under a written guarantee. Howard nodded quickly. Done. What about Brenda? Brenda stays, Donald said. Howard blinked, surprised. You want her to stay? After what she did? Donald nodded. Yes, but she is stripped of all authority over systems and operations. You will move her to a client relations role in strategy where she cannot touch the database or make administrative decisions. She is good at sales and presentations. Let her do that. But she answers to you, and she stays far away from my department. Howard stared at Donald for a long moment, a look of profound respect appearing in his eyes. You are not trying to burn the place down, Donald. No, Donald said, standing up. I am trying to fix the system. If you agree, draft the contract and the reinstatement papers for Gerald. I will run the server flushes and sign off on the safety logs once the paperwork is signed. Howard stood up and reached across the table. I will have the contracts ready in 30 minutes. By Monday morning, the transformation at Apex Logistics was official. A company-wide announcement went out, sent directly from the desk of Howard Davis. It was short, clear, and written in bold letters. Donald Vance had been named the new Director of Systems, effective immediately, with complete operational control over all database frameworks. As Donald walked down the hallway toward his new office, he noticed the immediate shift in the atmosphere. People who had barely acknowledged his presence for the past 10 years were suddenly smiling, nodding, and holding doors open. Roger Lawson was waiting near the break room, clutching a new client file. "Hey, Donald," Roger said, his voice unusually polite. "Congratulations on the promotion. It is truly well-deserved. If you have some time later this week, I would love to buy you a cup of coffee and discuss our new regional pipeline." Donald offered a professional, polite nod. "Thank you, Roger. Coordinate with my scheduler. We will see what we can do." Donald continued down the hall, feeling no bitterness, only a deep sense of validation. He walked into his new office, which was spacious, filled with natural light, and sat down at his desk. His first order of business was signing the official reinstatement paperwork for Gerald Higgins. By 10 o'clock, Gerald was back at his terminal in the main system suite. He looked 20 years younger, his shoulders relaxed and a genuine smile on his face. He came to Donald's office, holding a folder of network maps. "Donald, I don't know how to thank you," Gerald said, his voice thick with emotion. "They restored my full pension benefits, gave me a 10% raise, and issued a written apology for the administrative error." "You earned it, Gerald," Donald said, standing up to shake his hand. "You built the foundation of this company. I was just making sure the company respected that foundation." Once Gerald was settled, Donald began rebuilding his team. He bypassed the traditional human resources recruitment process and went straight to the tech support division. He pulled Julian Foster, a quiet but highly efficient 28-year-old analyst, out of the phone queues. Julian had been stuck troubleshooting password resets for 3 years, despite having a degree in software engineering. "Julian," Donald said during their first meeting, "I am restructuring our database maintenance team. I don't want people who just react when things break. I want people who can build resilient networks. You are going to run our automated diagnostics division." Julian stared at him, stunned. "Really? I have never been given an opportunity like this." "You have the talent," Donald said. "Now you have the space to use it." Over the next 6 months, Donald's new team worked diligently. They overhauled the clunky database architecture, replacing patches with elegant, streamlined scripts. They automated the routine maintenance procedures, reducing system downtime by 40% and increasing processing speeds across all departments. The Darwell account was so impressed with the new operational stability that they expanded their contract, adding $3 million in annual revenue. Brenda Kelly had been moved to the Client Relations Division on the 4th floor. Stripped of all systems access and operational decision-making power, she focused her energy on client presentations and sales pitches, where her polished demeanor was actually an asset. She no longer had any influence over Donald's department, and they kept their interactions strictly professional. One afternoon, Brenda stopped by Donald's office to drop off a client feedback binder. She stood near the doorway, arms crossed. "I suppose you feel vindicated," she said, her voice quiet. Donald looked up from his screen. "I feel like the company is finally running the way it should have been years ago, Brenda." She hesitated, then sighed. "I didn't block your advancement because I thought you were incompetent, Donald. I blocked it because you were the only one who could keep my department afloat. I couldn't afford to lose you from the day-to-day operations." Donald stood up, his expression serious but calm. "Using someone's dedication to trap them in a corner is not management, Brenda. That is exploitation. True leaders build others up. They do not hold them down out of fear." Brenda stared at him for a long second, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps you are right. Congratulations on the success of the new systems." She turned and walked away, and Donald knew the chapter was finally closed. He had not sought revenge, he had sought balance, and he had achieved it. That Saturday, Donald and Toby sat on the cold metal bleachers of the local high school stadium, watching the football game under the bright lights. Toby was cheering, eating a large hot dog, and shouting advice to the quarterback. Donald sat back, taking a deep breath of the cool autumn air. His phone remained in his pocket, silent and dark. During the halftime show, Donald's phone buzzed. It was a personal message from Howard Davis. The board just approved your promotion to Vice President of Operations. Brenda Kelly was the one who put your name forward. Congratulations, Donald. You have earned it. Donald looked at the message, a quiet smile spreading across his face. He locked the screen and slid the phone back into his pocket. What is it, Dad? Toby asked, looking over. Nothing, Donald said, wrapping an arm around his son's shoulders. Just a system running exactly the way it was designed to operate.